All right. So yesterday, we talked about it a lot on Monday's show and a little bit last week as well. The College Football Playoff Board of Managers officially approves a change to the 5+7 format for the 2024 and 2025 season. So we will have a 12-team playoff. 5 highest-ranked conference champions get in, 7 at-large bids. The top 4 of those 5 are going to get buys. The 5th one is guaranteed nothing except for a spot in the playoff. So we can call it the race for the 12 seed. I don't know. That's just judging by the way that things have looked before. Danny, I want to let you jump in on this first. Did you have, because we didn't get to hear from you on Monday, you were repping your KC, but not for the Chiefs, but for that travel volleyball, right?
Yeah, Tribe.
Let's go.
Tribe.
Did you guys win?
That's their club name, Tribe. They did not win. Highly, highly competitive tournament. Over 200 coaches were there. Division I coaches were watching, scouting the tournament. So, yeah, the girls were definitely nervous playing in front of them. But it's good to be back home and to weigh in on the 5+7 model, which, we all have talked about. It's the most obvious solution to a problem that we've had. I think it was the easy fix, and I think it is the least surprising thing of all that I'm already seeing SEC and Big Ten fans complain and administrators and higher-ups complain, saying, hold on a second. You're telling me that the Big 12 or ACC champ is guaranteed a bye? Like, are we sure that's going to happen? So this is a very short-term fix that I would expect is going to be, once again, drastically different in just 2 years.
Didn't we know all of this was happening?
Yeah, like, every bit of it.
I put out, this reminds me of on The Simpsons. Remember when Springfield was switching its area codes and Homer is somehow caught off guard and Lenny's like, but Homer, like, we went to area code camp. What about the leaflets they dropped from the sky and the weekly phone calls and Marge writing it on your arm? And like all of a sudden, it's like, totally caught off guard. Like, guys, we've been putting out graphics with the Cover 3 logo for the projected 12-team playoff if it was this year with these exact rules in place. Notre Dame can't make they can't get the home playoff game.
There were
not a conference champion.
So many articles about this 2 years ago.
God, like I feel like I'm such a bad podcast host now because we did not explain this very well. Like, I thought we did, but are people just playing dumb because they want to get their takes off? Because, guys, we've known about this for over a year.
What do you think, Bill?
I mean, he just said it. Like, we all talked about it, that we wrote about it. Nobody reads, I think, is what we learned, which makes me feel really good. But no, I mean, there were no surprises here. This was all, anytime anybody did a playoff simulation in the last 2 years, it involved these exact things. Jack Swarbrick was asked about it because he was on the committee that created the 12-team model.
He was on the super secret committee.
He said many times, like, it's fine. We'll take the 5 seed if we're unbeaten, and that'll be our conference title game, and then we'll move on. And like, it's weird, and it's always been a weird arrangement with Notre Dame, but none of this was a surprise, and it really was strange. I assume that it is just something that, sometimes I read something about it, I don't really grasp it until I really need to, which drives my wife crazy if it's like, a change in our billing or the city of Columbia or whatever. And, it just kind of flies right by me. But, this was something that we've all talked about, and I don't understand how people are surprised.
Yeah, I don't know if Michael is here, but if I'm going to be a real hater, I mean, are we really talking about Notre Dame being a top 4 team? I mean, come on. I mean, is it Notre Dame? Don't they just, their current state right now, high floor, right? But I mean, they just got 8 seed written all over them. You're probably going to get in there with like a 9-10 win season. You win enough of the big games, then yeah, you're probably going to be there. So I don't know how many times it was like this 12-0 Notre Dame team is going to get screwed, because I don't know how many times we're going to see a 12-0 Notre Dame team in the next 2 years.
8 seed gets to host playoff game.
Yeah.
So there is that.
It's a solid place to be.
Do we think that they sort of in exchange for some of the changes that they're wanting to go away from the 6-6 to the 5-7, do we think they agreed to keep one of the G5 teams in, and they're like, look, we'll keep you in. Nobody really wants to get sued on antitrust grounds, right? And I'm not really sure that the G5s have a great case for antitrust, but you don't really want to have to defend that, right? So maybe just keep it in. It's only one. If they lose, it's only 1 game per year type thing. I saw some people on Twitter like, why would they agree to this at all? Like, why are they letting the G5 in? First of all, I think it's the right thing to do, but I don't know. Maybe just from a business perspective, they like, yeah, it's really not that big of an ask.
It's incredible to me how much this argument has shifted in these last couple of years, though, because I've been doing a lot of research on old conference realignment stuff, old playoff argument stuff for, redacted reasons that I won't, that I can hopefully share in a future appearance. But like the entire BCS movement, a humongous part of it, the reason so many people were dissatisfied with the BCS was the Utahs and the TCUs and the Boise States especially kind of getting screwed by the whole deal and being better than what they were kind of given as status within the BCS bowls and whatnot. That was a humongous, Orrin Hatch, complaining on behalf of Utah and all this stuff. And so much of that, and this is my territory. This is, hooray underdog, hooray representation, all that stuff. This was such a big part of all of our arguing in like 2008, 2010. And now it's like, but should the SEC have 4 automatic bids to this 12-team playoff and forget the G5? Like, it's blows my mind. And I do not like it. And I do not like this universe that we seem to be moving toward.
Do we think Sankey is sincere in this quote unquote, I want 4 automatic qualifiers thing, or is it just, okay, yeah.
I assume it's a political anchor thing. Throw it way out here so that you get more of what you want elsewhere. But there's no reason for anybody to agree to it. The only card they have left is, well, we'll just start our own playoff and whatnot, and maybe the Super League thing happens. But if it's going to happen, you can't stop it. So fight for yourself in the meantime, I would say, with all the other commissioners.
Bill, you've done a really good job analyzing the playoff race during the season. I enjoy, going back and creating the resume SP plus, trying to reverse engineer old BCS ratings to see what those would be like. I mean, just lots of different ways to look at and what's incredibly an inexact science of trying to, decide how these teams are going to rank against each other, and especially with the committee being as unpredictable as they are. Bud has alleged, and I maybe agree to some of this, that a lot of the non-top 4 spots are just justifying whatever they want to do at the top 4, or especially the end of the ratings are just justifying what they're doing at the top. I don't know if that is sustainable now that more rankings matter. Now that we have these at-large bids, it can't just be reverse engineering the top 4. We've got real significance to what's happening between who's number 9 and who's number 12. When we're going to get to SP plus in a little bit, the rating of a 9 and a 12 might be very, very different. And that can be the difference in your playoff inclusion. I know you even went through and did like a quad system, right? At one point during this year, you sort of be like, okay, how'd you do against, top 30, top 50? Like, do you think that in the expanded playoff era, college football needs some kind of bigger than top 25 rating, some kind of net rating, or some way to judge a team that beats the 27th best team as valuable, as opposed to it having to be in the top 25?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of funny because I have a piece scheduled for March at some point. Like, how should we be ranking these teams? And I don't know the answer to that. I have like a month to figure that out, because if it's been such a frustrating process over the last 25 years, how they created a system. They went out of their ways because the polls were so malleable and political and everything. And nobody liked that if, you lose in week 2, it doesn't matter as much as if you lose in week 12 and all that stuff. And they created this BCS formula that incorporated polls and computers and tried to get at a more objective approach. And every time they disliked the results, they changed the system to fit what the humans preferred, to the point where they weren't even allowing computer ratings to factor in margin of victory, which is kind of the whole point of computer ratings, is factoring in like how, a 1-point win is not a 28-point win. And so they neutered the system, and then they made a big deal when they came up with the CFP that we're not going to have a formula. We're just going to have the smartest people in college football determining in all this. And in the very first year, TCU wins the game in the final week of the season and drops from 3rd to 6th because, conference title bump and all these other factors that go into everything. Like, it's just, there's not a good system. There's not a great system anyway, but just, I don't know what the best one is at this point. It was funny. Like, a couple of years ago, I was frustrated with the rankings sometime in 2022. So I did come up with let's create a BCS style formula. And I used SP plus and FPI, and then resume SP plus and strength of record, kind of a best and most deserving thing. And I combined that with the polls, and I basically got the CFP rankings. Like, in a given right in a given week, like that formula basically matched up with about 23 of the 25. But that, at the very least, that made it interesting to see which teams the committee did seem to be making a compromise on, in it, like where they kind of defied their typical logic and changed their mind. I'll give you one guess what the only disagreement between the formula and the committee was in the top 10 or 15 this last year. Something that we may have talked about a few times, something that a couple of Florida State grads on this podcast might have a pretty good guess on. But it is like we can get most of the way to what we have with a formula if we wanted to do a formula thing. I did like what Reese Davis said when we were talking about this on the game day pod in December. He's like, if they were to go back to a formula, you have to basically say, we are not changing this for the next 10 years. Like, this is just it. You have to live with it. Here's what they would have produced in previous years if we did it this way. This is going to be it. And we're not changing it. They're never going to do that. So I don't know what the best answer is.
Do you ever think we could come up with a system that somehow, I think almost every other sport does, where we don't have to have a committee, a formula, or anything? We just have a play-in playoff. Like, it is determined by the results on the field. Think there's a chance that could happen, or is there too much political power that's like, it's a resume? Like you said, the smart, I know you were being facetious, but the greatest minds of college football get together in this room, half of whom never played or coached football, and we're supposed to trust them when all they're doing is referencing the formulas that you mentioned and, spitting them back out. But do you ever think could be a system where we eliminate that?
Well, no. The short answer is no. Like, there's never going to be. The only way you would do that is if you had 12 auto bids for a 12-team playoff. And I mean, I'm all for giving, the 9 conference champions of FBS and then the top 3 conference champions in FCS. We wanted to make it that we could, but that's not going to happen. And so at some point and even then you would have to figure out how to rank them.
Right.
So like, there's no way to get away from some sort of ranking system, some sort of subjective analysis, and they do that at every level of the other sports within NCAA. So I mean, I guess it's never really that much of a departure, but it is it's hard, and there are enough power brokers. There's enough political pull here from a lot of different places that I don't know what the best realistic answer is for this. Yeah, especially since, talking about coaches and knowledgeable people and ADs, like that first playoff committee with Tom Osborne and all these, like, they got as much gravitas as they possibly could, but none of those. Tom Osborne doesn't know how to rank teams. Like, he knows how to coach football really, really, really well. And that's not the same thing as picking resumes or best or most deserving or whatever. And so even then it was kind of a flawed idea, because just because this doesn't mean this thing either. And it's never been, I've never loved the committee.
Fisherman in the chat who's watching in the Cover 3 tailgates watching us, youtube.com/Cover3. It's crazy how college basketball accepts KenPom, but CFB hates SP plus, FPI at Ketera. KenPom is on the selection committee team sheet. Strength of record is on the selection committee team sheet. KPI, like all of these numbers. I mean, Bill, is that just a sample size thing where when you have 30 games, then you do feel like those numbers have more value, and when you only have 12 games, like one bananas result could skew those numbers so much that you're hesitant to jump into it?
I mean, I guess, but to me that means you need computer records more with football, because the records can be more misleading. And so I can make pretty much exactly that is the one thing I'll always be proud of myself, because I got hired by ESPN in 2019. That fall, I did the whole, go to Dallas, sit in the committee room, go through the process, et cetera thing. And I was proud of myself for sticking up for like the way I view things in that room. Because I mean, Bill Hancock and others were proud of the fact that they don't use computer ratings. We don't need computer rankings. We have the mind power of this room. And I was proud of myself for basically saying that's kind of silly, and you're leaving off helpful criteria by not looking at it. And the other thing is, they don't use advanced stats. They still use stats that aren't as good. That's the other part of it, is we all use stats for however we're evaluating teams. We're using stats to do that. It's just, you could use better stats that tell you more and more accurate things than like, what's your record? And what was some of the other stuff, like kind of like your yardage versus the average that your opponent
they do the relative, they use the relative
stuff,
yards. Relatives is like total yards, relative yards, total rushing, relative rushing. And what I saw looking at a team sheet is that they just overload you. They throw you too many numbers, and then you're just like, I don't even know what to make of this. I'm just going to look at their loss column and then just sort them out however I see it.
And the other thing I do remember about that was, you can compare teams. You can pick team A versus team B, and when you put them on this computer screen at the same time, there's a bunch of green dots for like team A is superior here, here, and here. Team B is superior here, here, and here. And you basically just look at you count the green dots and say, well, team A must be better. That was like a very instinctive thing to do. Once you see that, I mean, I'm big on conditional formatting. Anybody who follows me on Twitter sees like posting a bunch of red and green stuff. So I know that process really well, but that's what a lot of people in the room seem to be doing too, is you can A, B, and C. Who has the most green dots? A must win this battle then. So A gets my vote. And that's fine if the stats you're using are really, really useful and helpful, but like rushing yards per game or whatever was on that, some of the things on that sheet, it wasn't doing it for me.
Air Force to the college football.
That's right. I mean, I'm cool with, I want that. That's exactly the world I want to live in.
All right, one last thing before we hit a break and then start to dive into SP Plus, the ratings and sort of the outlook of the 2024 season in college football. I don't think we're getting smaller. Bill, do you think 12 fits or 16? How's either your preference or your outlook? You can take it either way you want.
Well, I'm for it. Like, I know, knowing how much the coaches really those buys mean so much to coaches, especially. I think we underestimate. Every coach I've ever talked to said like that's almost too much of an advantage. If I had control over all this, and I very obviously do not, why not just add the other 4 conference champions, and instead of giving those top 4 seeds a bye, just give them an easier game? That cuts that advantage down a little bit. It gives you full representation, gives you the same number of at-larges. That's not going to happen, but I do think the fact that whichever article I was reading yesterday talked about Petiti 1 in 16. Like every time we get a new voice in the room, and these commissioner jobs seem to change constantly, except for the SEC. Every time you get a new voice in the room, they're going to say, well, what about this? And you start running the calculations on what a 16-team playoff could make you. And I think we just kind of gravitate in that direction. We're not going to, as much as we complain about bracket creep in basketball, we haven't really expanded the bracket in almost 40 years now. We're not going to get to like a 64-team football bracket by any means. I could easily see us getting to 16, though.
Which
well, go ahead.
Could involve killing conference title games, I guess.
Yeah,
like that. If we start to see conference title games go back to, I mean, they've only existed for kind of a short period of time in the history of the sport. People are like, oh, there's like the sanctity of college, football,
integrity and tradition. Yeah.
What, like the Big 12's conference title game has existed for how many years?
Right.
After they got left out. So 14, they get left out because they don't have a conference title game, and they got the regular season at the end of the year. They created it within the next 2 seasons.
Yeah.
That always cracked me up, by the way, since it cost them a number of BCS title shots, the title game did. And then they get left out once and like, we got to bring it back. But I guess that was just a money thing at the end of the day, too.
That to me is a step in the direction of getting rid of the committee, because the conference championship games are a problem right now. Like, what do you do after? What do you do with the loser? You have to slot them somewhere. If you include, or if you did away with them altogether, I think that solves one of those problems. It's still on the back end to be an issue, but I think that's
especially with bloated conferences.
Right.
I mean, 18 teams. We're just going to pick 2.
Right. Well, then, but I think you build in 4, whatever it is.
That was one of the more demoralizing things last fall when we had a bunch of really exciting title races, and I started to realize like, oh, almost everybody involved in these title races in the ACC and Big 12 or Big 12 especially, they're all going to be in the Big 10 or SEC next year. We're gonna like 4 of the top 10 are going to be in conference title games next year, and that's not as fun.
Yeah, I was like, on one hand, I think on Tuesday, I was like, hey, actually, 5+7 could be better for the ACC and the Big 12, because when you look at historically over the course of the college football playoff, schools like Florida State, schools like Utah, like they would have been in there. They would have been able to get those at-large bids. Yeah. But at the same time, I also ran a simulation of my projections for 2024 on Wednesday, and I ain't have any extra. I gave all the extras to the Big 10 and the SEC. So it's just kind kind of the way.
Yeah, that's one of the, looking at not just SP Plus rankings, but looking at projected wins right now. It's kind of funny. I expected like a lot of the debates moving forward to be like 9-3 SEC team versus 10-2 ACC team, that kind of thing. But looking at right now, actually Notre Dame has the highest projected win total at the moment, which is fun. But then even just looking at win totals, it's Big 10, SEC, Big 10, SEC, Big 10. So like, what that's telling me is like the Big 12 runner-up is going to be like 9-4 after the conference title game, and ACC maybe too. So this is not a good year for at-large bids outside of those two major conferences, I don't think. But we'll see. I mean, there are always surprises, I guess.
And fans are going to lose it when those teams jump ahead of all these at-large teams and get the 3 and the 4 seed and a bye.
That's
when
like the same
number 3 in the country. Like Oregon or Texas is going to be number 3 in the country in the final rankings and drop to a 5 seed, while Clemson jumps from 13 to 3 and Utah jumps from like 15 to 4.
Screw everything. I'm fine with it.
Take the checks.
Bring it on.